All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to do something a bit different today. We're going to pull out our toolboxes, roll up our sleeves, and literally dismantle the hidden mechanical gears of poetry to see how it actually works under the hood. So often, we treat poetry like it's this mystical, untouchable magic, but beneath the beautiful words and the profound emotions, there's a very real machine humming away. Today, we're zeroing in on two of the most powerful, grinding gears in that entire machine, meter and rhyming.
To help us tear this engine apart, we're bringing in literary theorist Terry Eagleton and his absolutely brilliant book, How to Read a Poem, which is going to be our guide today. Now, I know some folks think literary theory is just a bunch of dry abstractions that totally destroy the joy of reading, but Eagleton proves the exact opposite. He shows us that paying incredibly close attention to the absolute nuts and bolts of a text, its exact words, its pauses, its sounds, is quite literally the only way to truly understand what a poem is doing to us. He's going to help us decode poetic form.
So let's just start with a deceptively simple question. What actually makes a poem a poem? It's so easy to fall back on the ingrained assumption that poetry is just having a rigid rhythm or sticking words that sound alike at the end of a line. But is that all it is? And more importantly, what happens when those elements just completely go wrong?
Well, to figure that out, let's look at what happens when the rules of poetry violently fall apart. Just listen to this limerick. There was a young poet of Japan whose verses never would scan. When they asked him why, he said it's 'cause I just can't help getting as many words into the last line as I possibly can. Ouch, right? That awkward, jarring crash at the very end illustrates exactly what happens when the rules break down. That sense of physical discomfort you just felt proves that poetry is a highly structured system, and our brains inherently expect its rules to be followed.
Section 1. The poetry machinery and its mechanical systems. See, there was this famous group of critics called the Russian formalists, and they argued that poetry isn't magic at all. Instead, it's an overlay of distinct mechanical systems grinding against each other. We call this poetic form. People sometimes talk about digging out the ideas, quote-unquote, behind a poem's language, almost as if the form, the meter, the rhyme, the structure is just disposable cellophane wrapping that the ideas come packaged in. But that is completely backwards. The language, the rhythm, the shape of the poem on the page, that actually is the idea. The form is the very engine that drives the poem's meaning and generates the emotion you feel. You simply can't separate what the poem says from how it says it.
Section 2. Meter versus rhythm. The score versus the performance.
Okay, this distinction is absolutely vital, and honestly, people mix them up all the time. Think of meter as the regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. It's the metronome ticking away in the background, or the sheet music of a song. It is the predictable mathematical rule. Rhythm, on the other hand, is the irregular flow. It's the actual sway and flex of the human voice as it speaks those words out loud. If meter is the strict musical score, rhythm is the jazz performance spontaneously improvising right over the top of it.
Let me give you a perfect example of this tension from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. The line is, "How like a fawning publican he looks." Technically, this line is written in a strict meter called iambic pentameter. That means 5 beats alternating unstressed and stressed syllables. Now, if we read it strictly by the metrical score like a robot, it sounds completely absurd. How like a fawning publican he looks. I mean, nobody talks like that. But an actor reading this line uses natural human rhythm, emphasizing different words to convey real emotion. How like a fawning publican he looks. The true beauty of English poetry is the tension between these two forces, the ghost of that strict meter ticking in the background and the natural rhythm of the human voice pushing and pulling against it.
Moving on to our second main gear in Section 3, the psychology of rhyme, and how it goes way beyond mere repetition.
Because, look, rhyme isn't just some silly jingle for kids. It actually serves a deep psychological function for us. First off, human beings just love repetition. It makes us feel secure, it makes the world feel predictable and safe. There's actually a psychological theory that repetition helps us bind our emotional energy, basically saving us from burning out too much mental effort. But rhyme is incredibly clever because it's not just repetition. It perfectly balances identity and difference. When you hear the words dragon and wagon, your ear immediately recognizes the identical sound, right? But your brain highlights the completely different meanings. Rhyme forces us to link two entirely distinct ideas together simply because they share a phonetic echo. It's brilliant.
But what happens when a poet intentionally messes with that expectation of a perfectly comforting rhyme? Well, this brings us to the absolute horrors of the First World War and the brilliant poet Wilfred Owen. Look at this quote. He rhymes the word killed with the word cold. This is what we call pararhyme, or a near-miss rhyme. The consonants match up, but the vowels don't. Try reading it out loud to yourself. Killed, cold. It feels awry, doesn't it? It feels completely off-key. Owen is intentionally breaking the harmony of a perfect rhyme to create an eerie, tragic dissonance. A perfect chiming rhyme here would feel like a false, comforting harmony, and Owen wanted the poem to perfectly match the psychological devastation and trauma of the trenches. The broken form is the broken meaning.
Let's put these pieces together in Section 4, When Systems Collide, and the incredible aesthetic friction they create. Take a look at these incredibly famous lines from Robert Frost's poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. On the surface, the words describe a very quiet, spontaneous, natural event, just stopping your horse in the woods on a dark, snowy night. And the language is super simple and folksy. But the machinery of the poem is wound incredibly tight. It uses a heavily repetitive, mesmeric rhyme scheme: deep, keep, sleep, sleep. The unvarying meter taps away exactly like a metronome, and this brilliantly illustrates a massive tension. The rigid, highly artificial rhyme scheme is actively fighting against the simple, natural scene. It creates this seductive, almost foreboding sense of stasis. You can literally feel the pull of a deathly sleep in that hypnotic, repeating rhyme, fighting against the narrator's logical mind, telling him he has to wake up and move on.
Now let's flip it and look at the exact opposite approach. This is Emily Dickinson. She is writing about incredibly heavy, morbid, terrifying subjects here: death, centuries, eternity. But look at the meter she chooses. It's an alternating pattern of 4 stresses, then 3 stresses. It has a jaunty, sprightly, almost sing-song rhythm to it. Fun fact, her poems actually often share the exact same meter as the song The Yellow Rose of Texas. So here, the fast, jaunty meter ironically undercuts the heavy, terrifying reality of the subject matter. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't domesticate death, it actually makes it feel infinitely stranger and more unnerving because the form and the content are violently clashing against each other.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, breaking the rules to generate poetic information.
There's this brilliant semiotic theorist named Yuri Lotman who studied exactly how this works. He argued that a truly good poem is packed with what he calls poetic information. But how does a poem actually give us information? Well, Lotman says it does this by establishing strict rules, like a rigid meter or a predictable rhyme scheme, purely so it can break them. Think about it. If a poem's meter is perfectly regular the entire time, our brains just automate it. We literally stop hearing it. It just becomes a monotonous drone. But when a poet suddenly drops a syllable or breaks a rhyme or shifts the rhythm, bam! That unexpected deviation wakes us up. It's like a spark of electricity. A poem is a complex system of rules paired with an equally complex system of deliberately violating those rules. That friction is where the magic, the real beauty, actually lives.
So what's the big takeaway here? Poetry isn't just pretty thoughts floating aimlessly on a page. It's a highly engineered machine. It relies on the steady, driving heartbeat of meter, the psychological gravity of rhyme, and the thrilling, absolute shock of breaking both of those systems when you least expect it. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. The next time you encounter a poem, don't just passively read the words. Lean in. Listen to the grinding gears. Will you hear the strict, ticking rules of the meter? Or will you hear the magnificent, unpredictable deviations of the human voice? Dive into a poem today and see what you find. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.